Hi, Anna.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me again today. And I know that last week we discussed the not family prefix and we included un and in. And I know un is a little bit more simplified, but in gets a little bit messy. And that's how we ended the video last week, because today we're going to talk about how in can be an imposter. So let's just take a look at that word imposter, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. For a kid that just memorizes the word in and thinks not, here's one of those words that breaks the rule and is an imposter. Can you explain that?
So this comes from the Latin pono, to put, and not from the in negative prefix, which we learned last week and is what you would expect, but from the word in, as in English, in, inside, within, into. So it's somebody that is posing in a position. Yeah, so it's placing himself in the position of somebody else, for example. That would be an imposter. By the way, Angela, how do you spell imposter?
I spell imposter Imposter.
But I write it with OR at the end because it's closer to how it was spelled in Latin. However, they're both correct.
Well, I know you have a lot more examples. So can you go further into some other words that are imposter prefixes?
Yes, we're going to look at some words that start with N, and they undergo the same phonetical changes that we saw last week with the negative prefix. But actually, in these words, it doesn't mean a negation or an opposite. It just means into, inside, within. And it's not easy to get your head around so many words. So what I do generally is I organize them by semantic field. So we're going to look at a nice little set of words that have related meanings.
So in all of these words, we have in at the beginning. And as you can see, it undergoes the same changes as it does when it's a negative prefix in. But in this case, it's not a negative prefix. In this case, it can also act as a prefix in, meaning within, to the inside, or inside. Okay, so let's look at them one by one. The first one is illumination. Now, that does not mean lack of light. It's not in looks, illumine. Yeah, it's not lack of light. It's to bring the light in. So, illumination, irradiate, that comes from radius in Latin, which is something that comes out of the center and spreads. You could say a ray, as in a ray of light or a beam of light. So, for example, when we're talking about radiation, you can say that something irradiates. It means that it's emitting to the outside this radiation. Another one that's really useful to have is incandescent. Now, this comes from the, again, in, meaning within or inside, and cand, which in Latin and also in Indo-European is the root that means bright or shiny. You can still find this root in words like candle, obviously, and a bit more hidden in other words, like, for example, candidate. A candidate in Roman times was somebody who wore a very white toga in preparation for an election. Same for inflammable. That comes from flamma, which means flame in Latin. And when something goes into flames or turns into flames, we say that it is inflammable. This is a tricky one. You must remember inflammable doesn't mean non-flammable. So if they say a substance is inflammable, you want to be very careful with it. Insolation, which is the radiation that hits the earth from the sun. So when the sun irradiates this radiation and it arrives on earth, we call that insolation because it's the radiation that comes from the sun. So sol is the sun, so insolation, the sun coming in. Flamma is the flame, so inflammation. You get that when you get ill as well. If you have a problem with your um, joints or something, they get inflamed. Yes, they get into flame. They get all red and hot. Yes, so that's the flame going in. Incandescent. Here you could think about words like candid, meaning beaming and white, yeah, and shiny. And then irradiate from radius. A radius is a ray. You could think here about the radius of a circumference, for example, because it's going from the center. And then illumination, you could think about here, I don't know, luminescence, or you could think about illustration. This is from lumen, light in Latin, and also obviously lux is a cognate meaning light as well.
Thank you, Anna. That was so helpful, just being able to see the visual and have you explain the history and go in depth on some of these things.
And this gives you options to think about. And over time, obviously, the more you encounter these words, hopefully reading a lot and enjoying them rather than with a list, then the better you'll get at knowing what they mean.
And I agree, because I've always thought that the best way to understand words is really to see them in context,
Yes.
and to read. I just want to talk briefly about what our students and or parents can look forward to for our part 3 session, just on, again, sometimes there is still a battle of the un and the in and which word to use.
Very much.
We could just look at in America, even in our own Declaration of Independence, it was written with the unalienable rights, but now we use inalienable rights, which comes from Latin. So maybe we can even talk a little bit more and recap further just about that battle going on.
Yes, it's a long story, but a very interesting one, because words are created over time and we use languages in a very productive way. So sometimes they go one way, sometimes they go the other, and there's trends as well. So we can talk about that next week. It would be lots of fun, I think.
We hope to see you guys next week. So hit the like button, hit the share button, and we'll see you next week. Bye, Anna.
Bye, Angela.